The chandeliers blazed above the marble-floored ballroom, scattering light across sequined gowns and black-tie tuxedos. Cameras clicked in a rapid, hungry rhythm at the entrance. Every lens tilted upward when Adrian Locke, billionaire mogul, appeared with his arm draped around Vanessa Blake, the young, magnetic woman who had quickly become his newest prize. Vanessa leaned into him like she owned the night. Her gown clung in the right places, emerald silk that shimmered as though made to blind the envious. "Hold your chin higher," she whispered to Adrian, not realizing the microphones would catch it. He smirked, playing the part of untouchable monarch. The crowd parted with subtle awe as though gravity bent around wealth. Reporters shouted Adrian's name. Flashes bathed him in halos of light. Vanessa, drunk on attention, laughed for no reason at all, tilting her head so the diamonds at her neck blazed brighter than the chandelier crystals above. Behind them, almost unnoticed, Clara Locke stepped into the same space. Her dress was navy blue, neither old nor new, simply practical. The fabric didn't gleam. Her heels clicked softly, too soft to command a room full of wealth. She held her clutch close to her body like a shield. Her eyes flickered across the cameras, not searching for pity but calculating something none of them could see. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. Vanessa saw her first. A sharp smile tugged at her lips, cruel and victorious. She leaned to Adrian's ear. Look who couldn't resist crashing the party. Her laughter rang like glass breaking. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting Vanessa feed off the moment. Around them, whispers surged like a tide. "Isn't that the wife? She looks ordinary. Not in his league anymore." Clara heard every word but kept walking, her back straight, her hands steady. She chose the far side of the ballroom near the champagne tower, where the light didn't reach as brightly. Her face gave nothing away. Vanessa, unable to resist, spoke louder, just enough for nearby guests to hear. "Imagine showing up in that. Did she pull it from a clearance rack?" Laughter trickled, nervous but eager to belong to the stronger side. Cameras swung toward Clara, capturing her stillness, her silence, as if waiting for her to break. Adrian chuckled, a low sound meant only for Vanessa. Yet when he glanced toward his wife, something snagged inside him. Clara didn't look broken. She didn't even look embarrassed. She looked like someone holding a secret. And that unsettled him more than her presence. At the champagne table, Clara lifted a glass. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the crystal tower, multiplying her figure into 100 versions, each quiet, each waiting. She sipped without a tremor, her eyes steady on Adrian across the room. For one instant he faltered under her gaze, but Vanessa looped her arm tighter through his. "Ignore her. She's irrelevant." She laughed again, too loudly this time, and the sound bounced against the marble, cheap against the grandeur. Guests followed her lead, smiling at the cruelty, pretending it was harmless. Clara set her glass down. She did not cry, she did not leave. Her humiliation was staged, yes, but not by accident. Her silence tonight wasn't weakness. It was the first note of something darker. The calm before a storm only she understood. As the cameras kept flashing on Adrian and Vanessa, a different kind of attention quietly shifted. A few pairs of eyes noticed Clara's composure. A detective in the corner scribbled in a notebook. A journalist snapped one discreet photo, sensing a story bigger than glittering gowns. Clara's lips curved faintly, the shadow of a smile no one could interpret. She turned her face away from the laughter, her expression unreadable, her body unshaken. The night belonged to Adrian and Vanessa, for now. But beneath the chandeliers, among the careless jokes and shimmering gowns, Clara's silence planted the seed of reckoning. And in the shadows, where no camera lingered too long, the storm inside her began to rise. The echo of laughter from the gala still rang in Clara's ears as memory tugged her backward, into the years when she too had walked into rooms beside Adrian Locke, hand in hand, the world watching. There was a time when their marriage glittered brighter than the chandeliers. She had been young, ambitious, alive with ideas for her career in architecture. Adrian had seemed endlessly fascinated by her. He listened intently at first, repeating her words as though they were poetry. "You're the only one who truly sees me," he used to whisper into her hair at night. And she believed him. But charm is a mask and masks slip. Slowly the sweetness turned sharp. The whispers became instructions. You don't need to work, Adrian said one evening, swirling his drink with practiced ease. Designing buildings? That's not your destiny. You should be focused on me. On us. His voice was velvet wrapped around iron. Clara resisted at first, trying to hold on to her dreams. Yet every objection met his smirk, his sighs, his carefully chosen words that twisted devotion into duty. If you loved me, he'd say, you wouldn't need anyone else's applause. The words burrowed into her skin until she doubted herself more than she doubted him. Her colleagues faded. Her sketches gathered dust. She exchanged blueprints for dinner menus, lectures for galas. Standing beside Adrian, she smiled for cameras even when her heart carried the weight of surrender. Gaslighting became his art. When she confronted him about late nights, about whispers of other women, his laughter cut her down. You're paranoid, Clara, always imagining ghosts. I work to give you this life, and still it's not enough? He would storm out, leaving her curled in silence, questioning her own sanity. The betrayals multiplied like cracks in glass, each small, each deniable, until the whole surface threatened to shatter. Clara found perfume on his shirts that wasn't hers. She overheard phone calls ended too quickly, yet when she asked, he turned the blame with surgical precision. If you weren't so insecure, maybe I wouldn't look elsewhere for comfort. Years pressed on. What began as dazzling romance hardened into a gilded cage. The mansion felt less like home and more like a stage where Clara played the part of dutiful wife. Friends stopped asking about her dreams. She stopped speaking them aloud. Still, there were moments, fleeting, when she remembered who she once was. Quiet hours in the study. When Adrian was gone, she'd unroll her old sketches, tracing the lines of buildings she never built. She hid them away before he returned, like contraband, proof that a different Clara had once existed. The slow erosion of love wasn't loud. It was subtle, patient, corrosive. By the time Vanessa entered their lives, Clara wasn't shocked. She was tired. The betrayal wasn't just another woman. It was the culmination of every cut, every dismissal, every whispered word that convinced her she was nothing without him. And yet, deep within the silence he mistook for weakness, Clara's resolve began to take shape. He had stripped her of career, of pride, of dreams. But one thing he hadn't taken was memory. She remembered every word, every bruise to her spirit, every receipt left in pockets, every late-night call. She carried them like stones in her chest, heavy but undeniable. At the gala, when Vanessa mocked her dress and laughter filled the air, Adrian didn't realize she was already counting the stones. He didn't know she was building something with them, not walls, not a tomb, a weapon, and in time it would be sharp enough to cut him down. If Clara had once been Adrian's anchor, Vanessa Blake was his trophy. Where Clara had offered quiet devotion, Vanessa delivered spectacle. And for a man like Adrian, hungry for validation, terrified of fading, spectacle was the only currency that mattered. Vanessa was impossible to ignore. Cameras loved her, and she loved them back. She had grown up in modest suburbs, but taught herself the language of luxury, with ruthless precision. Her Instagram glittered with champagne flutes and designer bags. Her smile was trained to flash at just the right angle. Her laughter pitched high enough to be caught on every microphone. At the gala, Vanessa basked in the flashes. They can't get enough of us, she whispered, tugging at Adrian's lapel as if adjusting her property. Her eyes darted toward Clara standing alone, and a sly grin crossed her lips. You upgraded. Don't ever forget it. Adrian chuckled, his hand resting possessively on Vanessa's back. She was younger, bolder, and to him she symbolized vitality. With Vanessa, he could pretend he wasn't a man nearing his 50s with shadows of scandal trailing behind him. With Vanessa, he felt untouchable, but Vanessa's confidence was sharpened with cruelty. Every glance toward Clara was dipped in venom. She leaned into Adrian, whispering comments designed to wound. That dress. Does she shop in clearance bins? Imagine being photographed like that. Adrian smirked, the insult feeding his ego, convincing him Clara's dignity was worth less than Vanessa's approval. Guests played along, laughing nervously. For them, Vanessa was entertainment, wild, glamorous, unapologetic. She danced like the room belonged to her, dragging Adrian into the center, spinning with a flair that forced every gaze to follow. She was no longer the other woman. Tonight she was the star. Yet even stars cast shadows. Later at the bar, Vanessa's smile faltered when she caught a conversation between two executives. They spoke in hushed tones, names slipping out like threats: federal investigators, shell companies, missing funds. Adrian's empire wasn't as unshakable as it looked. For a brief moment, fear flickered across her face. "Something wrong?" Adrian asked, sipping his whiskey, his eyes narrowing. She recovered instantly, flashing her perfect grin. "Nothing. Just wondering why the bartender is slower than your lawyers." Her laugh sparkled again, but her hand tightened around the stem of her glass. Vanessa had always been drawn to power, but she wasn't foolish. She knew men like Adrian built empires on fragile foundations. If those foundations cracked, she wouldn't go down with them. Her loyalty was as fragile as the champagne bubbles bursting in her glass. Still, she played her part. As the night wore on, Vanessa ridiculed Clara with small gestures. A mocking glance at her shoes, a pointed tug at her Couture gown. She clung to Adrian as though her grip alone proved she had won, but beneath her glittering performance, calculations whirred. She was no longer looking only at Clara. She was watching Adrian too. Clara, from her corner, saw it all. She saw Vanessa's confidence, yes, but also the tiny falter in her expression when the executives whispered. Clara recognized that look. It was the same one she had worn for years, fear hidden under performance. Vanessa laughed louder, posed harder, kissed Adrian longer. But Clara knew the truth. Vanessa wasn't just mocking her. She was distracting herself from the storm that was already brewing, and Adrian, blinded by vanity, didn't notice. He couldn't see that his mistress, the very symbol of his youth and power, was already weighing her options. For now, Vanessa played the spotlight flawlessly. But when the lights dimmed and the whispers grew louder, her loyalty would fracture, and Adrian, so used to being adored, would discover just how sharp betrayal could be. The gala ended in glitter and noise, but outside, the night pressed cold and still against the pavement. Clara slipped out quietly, her modest dress brushing the stone steps, her figure almost swallowed by the shadows. No cameras followed. No reporters cared. The spotlight had already moved on, but someone was watching. Detective Elena Ramirez leaned against the black sedan parked across the street, the glow of a cigarette faint against her lips. She'd been assigned to financial surveillance months ago, tracing threads that kept leading back to Adrian Locke. Tonight, she wasn't interested in the billionaire's mistress or his hollow smile. She was watching the wife, silent, composed, walking like a woman carrying something heavier than humiliation. Elena flicked ash into the gutter and narrowed her eyes. Clara Locke didn't fit the pattern. Most scorned wives lashed out, broke down, or vanished into quiet resignation. But Clara? She walked like someone who knew more than she let on. Her notebook rested on the dashboard, already crowded with names and dates. Adrian Locke's history filled its pages like rot beneath polished wood. Shell companies shifting money through Caribbean banks. Employees silenced with ironclad NDAs. Court settlements that disappeared before they could leave a stain. He had dodged fraud charges 3 times, skated past tax investigations, and somehow managed to charm every jury that glimpsed him. And then there were the whispers. Elena had heard them late at night, in bars where old associates loosened their tongues with whiskey. Disappearances, men who threatened to testify, women who claimed too much, rivals who suddenly went silent. Nothing proven but the kind of smoke that only rose from fire. Elena's gaze followed Clara as she hailed a cab. The woman's hand trembled slightly when she closed the door, but her face remained steady, almost detached. That steadiness unsettled Elena more than Adrian's arrogance ever had. "This isn't just a wronged wife," Elena muttered under her breath. She could feel it in her gut. Clara wasn't walking away from humiliation. She was walking toward something. Elena scribbled in her notebook. Clara Locke. Possible leverage. Possible witness. Inside the gala, the music swelled again. Vanessa's laughter spilling out the doors. Cameras still clicking at Adrian's smile. But outside, the real story was taking shape, and Elena knew it. She thought back to the files still open on her desk at the precinct. Bank ledgers with missing millions. Offshore accounts under names too convenient to be coincidences. Adrian Locke's empire wasn't a monument. It was a fragile house of glass. And Clara, the silent figure now disappearing into the night, looked like someone who might already be holding the stone. Elena crushed her cigarette beneath her heel and started the car. She wouldn't approach Clara yet. Timing mattered. Too soon and Clara might retreat. Too late and the evidence might vanish with her. But one truth pulsed steady in Elena's chest as the engine hummed to life. Clara Locke was more than a discarded wife. She was a witness, maybe even a weapon. And if she truly carried the proof Elena suspected, then Adrian Locke's glittering empire was already beginning to crack. The cab ride home was silent, the city lights smearing across the window like fading brushstrokes. Clara sat stiffly, hands folded around her clutch, her reflection a pale ghost staring back at her. By the time she reached her apartment, the gala's glitter had dissolved into memory, leaving only the weight of humiliation and the seed of resolve it watered. Her building was modest, far from the marble halls she once called home. She climbed the narrow stairwell slowly, keys cold in her hand. The lock clicked, the door swung shut behind her, and suddenly she was surrounded by silence. No cameras, no laughter, no Vanessa. Just her heartbeat echoing through the small, dimly lit space. She walked straight to the closet at the end of the hall. The wooden door creaked, revealing coats, worn shoes, and a single chest shoved deep into the corner. She knelt before it, her fingers brushing the cold steel of the lock. For years she had hidden this chest from Adrian, hidden it even from herself. Tonight, humiliation had unlocked something deeper than keys. Tonight it was time. Clara reached beneath a folded sweater and pulled out the small key she'd kept on a chain around her neck. It slid into the lock with a soft click. The lid lifted and the air seemed to thicken as old secrets breathed again. Inside lay her silent arsenal. Stacks of receipts, some faded, others crisp, evidence of purchases Adrian never intended to explain. Jewelry bought for women who weren't his wife. Hotel invoices under aliases too thinly veiled. Photographs carefully dated, showing him with women in places he claimed he never visited. Letters written by Clara in moments of rage and clarity, documenting every lie, every late night, every cut he had carved into her. At the bottom was the darkest piece. A ledger she'd copied from his office one reckless night years ago. Numbers that didn't add up, transfers to offshore accounts, payments to names she didn't recognize but had since learned belonged to shell corporations and men who had vanished. Clara sat back on her heels, her hands trembling as she spread the evidence across the floor. Each page, each photo was another piece of Adrian's empire stripped bare. To the world he was a billionaire, a titan, a man of vision. But here on the cracked floorboards of her modest apartment, he was nothing more than a thief draped in charm. Her phone lay on the table, screen glowing faintly. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Her fingers hovered uncertain until she typed in a number she hadn't dialed in years. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, rough with sleep but alert. "Clara?" She exhaled slowly. "It's time." There was silence on the other end, then the faint rustle of paper. The voice sharpened. "Do you have something?" Her eyes swept the floor. Photographs, receipts, letters, ledger pages glowing under the lamp like shards of broken glass. Her lips curled into something between fear and determination. "I have everything," she whispered. The journalist's breath caught audibly. "You're ready to go on record?" Clara's hand tightened around the phone. She thought of Vanessa's mocking laughter, Adrian's smug smile, the way the room had turned against her. Shame was no longer enough. She wanted truth to echo louder than lies. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady, "but on my terms." The line went quiet. Then the journalist's voice returned, urgent but controlled. "Then we start tonight." Clara closed her eyes, the weight of years pressing down before lifting all at once. She wasn't just a discarded wife anymore. She was the keeper of Adrian Locke's undoing, and as the call ended, Clara looked back at the chest still open on the floor. The secrets inside were no longer hidden. They were weapons now, sharp, undeniable, and ready to draw blood. Morning light streamed through the penthouse windows, glittering off glass and steel. Adrian Locke stood at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone with narrowed eyes. The message had arrived at dawn, anonymous, blunt, and sharp as a blade. "Your files aren't safe. The world will know soon, no name, no number traceable." Just a warning that burned like acid in his chest. Adrian's jaw clenched as he reread it. Files. Which files? He had hundreds. Corporate audits, offshore transfers, confidential agreements buried in layers of lawyers and coded ledgers. It had to be a rival, he told himself. Someone envious of his empire, eager to rattle him before the next acquisition deal. Behind him, Vanessa padded into the kitchen in a silk robe, her hair tousled from sleep yet still immaculate. She poured herself coffee, glanced at his scowl, and smirked. "You look like someone stole your crown." Adrian didn't answer immediately. He turned the phone so she could see the message. Vanessa skimmed it, then rolled her eyes. "Anonymous threats, please. That's what happens when you're successful. Everyone wants to knock you down." She leaned against the counter, sipping her coffee. "Relax, darling. You're untouchable." Her laughter echoed, light and dismissive, but Adrian didn't join in. Untouchable. The word should have comforted him, but instead it hollowed out his chest, because deep down he knew better. He had spent years patching cracks in his empire with bribes, lies, and intimidation. Untouchable was a fantasy he sold to the world, and to himself. Still, he forced a smirk, unwilling to let Vanessa see his unease. "You're right. Probably some competitor trying to spook me." He slipped the phone into his pocket, his voice casual but his eyes betrayed calculation. What Adrian didn't see, what no one saw, was Clara at her small apartment across town. The chest of secrets still lay open on her floor, its contents spread like a battlefield map. The call to the journalist had been only the first move. Now she was setting the stage, carefully, deliberately. Step 1. Let Adrian believe the threat wasn't her. The anonymous message had been her idea. Crafted with precision, routed through layers of encryption, it was a seed, planted deep in his paranoia, meant to sprout doubt. She knew him well enough to predict his every reaction. He would suspect rivals, enemies, even his own executives. But never her. Not the woman he had humiliated, mocked, discarded. To Adrian, Clara was powerless, and she was counting on that blind spot. At the penthouse, Adrian dialed his head of security. His voice was low, clipped. "Trace this number. I don't care how many hours it takes. And tighten every firewall. I want leaks plugged before they exist." "Yes, sir," came the reply. Vanessa watched him, amused. "Look at you, king of the castle, rattled by a text. Honestly, Adrian, if you crumble this easily, maybe you don't deserve the throne." She kissed his cheek, leaving a red mark, and drifted toward the balcony, unconcerned. Adrian scowled after her. He didn't crumble. He planned. And whoever sent that message, whoever dared, would regret it. Across town, Clara sipped her own coffee, far simpler, her lips tightening with resolve. She could almost feel Adrian pacing, almost hear his irritation through the city itself. That was good. That was necessary. Let him believe he was untouchable. Let him laugh with Vanessa, rage at rivals, tighten his walls. He would never suspect that the true danger was already inside his past, buried in every receipt, every ledger, every photograph she now controlled. The trap had been set, and Adrian Locke had just stepped into it blind. The trap had been set, and Clara could feel its tension humming in the air. Adrian was searching for enemies in the boardroom, tightening walls that would never protect him. Meanwhile, Clara was preparing for her own battlefield, not with ledgers and files, but with something far older and more primal: image. The morning after the anonymous message, she stood in front of a discreet atelier on the edge of the city. Its windows gleamed. Mannequins posed inside, draped in silks, brocades, and fabrics she had once only admired in glossy magazines. This was not her world, at least not the one Adrian had permitted her to live in. For years he'd told her luxury wasn't hers to wear, but his to bestow. She had been the accessory, not the owner. Now she pushed open the glass door and stepped inside. The atelier smelled of linen and dye, of chalk dust and ambition. Rolls of fabric towered against the walls, soft waterfalls of color waiting to be shaped into something powerful. Mannequins lined the floor, frozen women adorned in armor disguised as dresses. Each gown whispered of a life denied her. Power dinners, red carpets, stages where voices carried further than laughter. Clara ran her hand over the edge of a sequined bodice, the cold beads sharp beneath her fingertips. She imagined Vanessa in something similar, basking in flashes, mocking her from across the ballroom. But Clara wasn't here to imitate Vanessa. She was here to reclaim the space that had once belonged to her. A woman emerged from behind a cutting table, measuring tape slung across her shoulders. Her eyes were sharp, her smile curious. "You must be Clara." Clara nodded. She had called ahead, her voice steadier than she'd felt. The designer looked her up and down, not with disdain, but with assessment, as though she were already dismantling and rebuilding her in her mind. "Tell me what you want," she said softly. Clara hesitated. What did she want? For years she hadn't asked herself that question. Finally she exhaled. "I don't want to hide anymore. I don't want pity. I want silence. I want the laughter to stop." The designer tilted her head, understanding flashing in her eyes. "Then we won't dress you for revenge," she said. "We'll dress you for truth, for who you were always meant to be." They walked past bolts of fabric, Clara touching each one as though it might tell her something about herself. Satin, velvet, chiffon, all luxuries once denied her, now laid bare to choose from. Her fingers lingered on a deep sapphire silk, shimmering like midnight oceans. It wasn't flashy but commanding, regal without apology. The designer smiled knowingly. "Yes, that's the one." For hours they worked together. Measurements, sketches, discussions whispered over clippings of fabric. Clara stood before mirrors as pins pricked seams into place, watching herself slowly emerge from behind the years of Adrian's shadow. Each adjustment was like breathing for the first time. Each cut of fabric was a piece of herself sewn back together. When the initial fitting was complete, the designer stepped back, eyes gleaming. "This will not just be a dress," she promised. "It will be armor, and when you walk into that room, no one will dare laugh." Clara met her gaze in the mirror. For the first time in years, she saw not a discarded wife, not a victim, but a woman sharpening herself for battle. Across the city, Adrian laughed with Vanessa, convinced his enemies were faceless men in suits. He had no idea the most dangerous weapon was being tailored in silk and silence. The hum of a sewing machine echoed in Clara's world, threads of silk binding her armor together. But across town, in a dimly lit precinct office, another thread was tightening around Adrian Locke. Detective Elena Ramirez leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the spread of documents littering her desk. Bank statements, wire transfers, shell corporations, it was a spider's web, and Adrian sat fat at its center. She tapped a pen against the page where his signature scrawled across a suspicious merger. Fraud was obvious, but proving it airtight had always been the problem. Now new pieces were surfacing, pieces with Clara's fingerprints. Elena opened a plain envelope slid under her office door that morning. No return address, just her name in neat handwriting. Inside, she found copies of receipts, photographs, even a scan of a ledger page she recognized from Adrian's elusive accounts. The kind of evidence investigators had chased for years suddenly appearing in her hands. She frowned. Clara Locke, it had to be her. Who else had the proximity, the patience, the motive? Elena remembered the way Clara had walked out of the gala. Silent, dignified, yet carrying an invisible weight. She wasn't simply a wife humiliated in public. She was a woman preparing to strike. Still, Elena hesitated. Law was one thing. Vengeance was another. If Clara unleashed this evidence on her own terms, the fallout would be unpredictable. The courts might drown in scandal. The press might twist the story until justice looked like theater. Clara wasn't bound by procedure, she was bound by pain. And pain could scorch the truth as easily as it revealed it. Elena rubbed her temples. She'd spent her career chasing men like Adrian, men who thought money bought silence, who treated laws as speed bumps. But rarely did justice come wrapped in silk and determination. A knock at her door broke the silence. A junior agent leaned in, voice low. "Ma'am, the feds are circling Locke Industries. Word is they're looking for a trigger to move." Elena's pen froze mid-tap. A trigger. Clara's files could be exactly that. One dossier dropped in the right hands and Adrian's empire would topple overnight. But how much collateral damage would follow? Adrian employed thousands. Stocks would crash. Families would suffer. Clara, blinded by her personal vendetta, might not care, but Elena had to. Justice wasn't just about striking down the guilty. It was about protecting the innocent tangled in their wake. She leaned back, staring at the envelope again. It felt hot, dangerous, alive with possibility. Do I stop her? She thought. Or do I let her burn him down? In her mind's eye, she saw Clara at the atelier, draped in half-finished silk, eyes sharper than scissors. This wasn't just about clothing. It was about walking into Adrian's world one last time, not as the humiliated wife, but as the executioner. Elena closed the envelope and slid it into her desk drawer. For now, she would wait. Justice sometimes needed patience. And Clara Locke was already in motion, unstoppable, weaving her revenge into something the cameras would never ignore. The whispers had begun. And soon, they would grow too loud for Adrian Locke to silence. The city buzzed with anticipation as limousines pulled up to the Grand Hotel hosting the charity gala of the year. Paparazzi clustered outside, their cameras flashing like lightning against the marble facade. It was the kind of night Adrian Locke adored, an opportunity to be seen, admired, envied. Vanessa emerged first, stepping out of the sleek car in a gown of molten gold, her hair swept into an elaborate crown of curls. She paused deliberately, tilting her chin so the diamonds at her ears caught every burst of light. Reporters shouted her name and she laughed, reveling in the chorus. Adrian followed, dressed in a midnight black tuxedo, his smile wide and confident. To the crowd they looked like royalty, untouchable and glittering. Vanessa clung to his arm and whispered, "Tonight is ours. Don't worry about your little ghost. She won't dare show her face again." Adrian smirked, though a flicker of unease tugged at him. Ever since the anonymous warning, he'd felt watched. But tonight, with cameras exploding and Vanessa purring beside him, he let himself believe he was safe. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and velvet drapes. Guests circled with champagne flutes, their voices rising in laughter and speculation. Vanessa preened under the attention, making snide remarks just loud enough to be heard. "Imagine if Clara showed up again," she said, her tone dripping with mockery. "She'd probably wear that same sad little dress. She doesn't belong here anymore." The nearby guests chuckled, eager to be on Vanessa's side. But the laughter died the moment the doors opened. Clara entered. She moved slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a drumbeat announcing war. Draped in a gown unlike anything the room had ever seen, she seemed carved from midnight silk, each fold sculpted to perfection. The dress shimmered under the lights, regal and commanding, a second skin that told the world she had returned not as prey, but as power itself. The crowd gasped. Cameras swung in unison, flashes drowning the room in bursts of white. For the first time that night, Vanessa's smile faltered. Adrian froze, his breath caught as if the air had been ripped from his lungs. He had expected Clara to remain invisible, humiliated, silent. But here she was, reborn. Every eye in the room turned from him and Vanessa to her, the scorned wife transformed into something untouchable. Clara didn't hurry. She let the cameras devour her, let the whispers ignite around her like wildfire. "Is that Clara Locke? She looks incredible." "She outshines them all." Vanessa's nails dug into Adrian's arm. "This is a stunt," she hissed. She rented it. "She's desperate." But her voice trembled, betraying the fear she tried to mask. Clara's gaze swept the room before settling on Adrian. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply looked at him, and that was enough. Because in that look, Adrian saw something he had never recognized before. Control. The photographers surged forward, abandoning Adrian and Vanessa entirely. Flashes erupted, questions fired. "Clara! Who designed it?" "Clara, over here!" "Clara, tell us about the gown." Her name filled the air, louder, prouder than Vanessa's ever had. Adrian's chest tightened. The mistress clinging to him had vanished into irrelevance in the space of a heartbeat. He no longer saw her. He saw only Clara, his wife, the woman he thought he'd broken, standing triumphant in the spotlight. Clara walked further into the ballroom, her gown trailing like a banner behind her. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence was enough, and with every flash of the cameras, Adrian felt his empire trembling at its foundation. The night that was supposed to celebrate him had become her stage. Adrian Locke had built his empire on the illusion of control, his charm, his money, his ability to bend people to his will. But as Clara stood across the ballroom draped in midnight silk, his control cracked like glass under a hammer. The room seemed to tilt. Conversations quieted, laughter shrank, and a tide of whispers swelled until it drowned out everything else. The cameras didn't want him anymore. They didn't care for Vanessa's glittering gown or his expensive smile. Every lens, every flash, every pair of eyes belonged to Clara. Adrian froze. It wasn't just her transformation that unnerved him. It was the reminder. Years ago, he had caught a glimpse of that locked chest she kept in their home office. Receipts, photographs, letters. She had brushed it off then, claiming it was nothing, a private collection of old memories. He had believed her, or rather dismissed her, certain she lacked the will to use it. But as Clara held herself in front of the cameras now, poised, silent, unflinching, Adrian understood. She hadn't just come back for dignity. She had come armed. A sheen of sweat gathered at his temple. He tugged at his collar, forcing a smile, but it wavered, unnatural and strained. Around him, the whispers grew sharper. Did you see the way she looked at him? She has something. You can tell. She's not afraid anymore. Vanessa noticed the shift, too. Her smile fractured, rage flashing behind her eyes. She tugged at Adrian's arm, nails biting into his skin. Why are you staring at her? Look at me, she hissed. But he couldn't. He was transfixed, caught in the gravity Clara now commanded. Vanessa's fury spilled into action. She stepped forward, laughing loudly, waving at the photographers as though she could redirect them. Over here. Don't waste your film on her. She's wearing a costume. I'm the future. Her words rang false, brittle, and the cameras barely flicked in her direction. The press circled Clara instead, firing questions she didn't answer. Her silence was stronger than Vanessa's shrill laughter. She simply walked further into the room, each step echoing like a verdict. Adrian's chest tightened. His mind spiraled back to every careless mistake, every paper trail he thought he'd buried. Did she have the files? The ledger? The offshore records? And worse, had she already shared them? The air grew suffocating. He forced himself to move to steady his voice. Clara, he called, a smile glued to his lips though his jaw clenched hard enough to ache. You look radiant. She turned her head toward him, her expression unreadable, her eyes steady. The silence stretched heavy until it crushed him. That single look told him what words could not. She knows. She always knew. Vanessa's temper snapped. She shoved his hand away and stormed toward the exit, her heels striking the marble like gunfire. If you won't handle her, I'm not staying to watch you drool over your relic of a wife. She spat, her voice sharp enough to pierce the hush. Guests turned, scandal rippling through the room. Cameras caught every frame of her fury, every ounce of Adrian's humiliation. Adrian didn't chase her. He couldn't. His world was collapsing inward, and Clara stood at the center of its implosion. As she passed him, the hem of her gown brushed the floor between them, deliberate, regal. She didn't speak, didn't acknowledge Vanessa's departure, didn't even pause, but her silence screamed louder than words. I have everything I need to end you. Adrian's smile faltered, the mask slipping. For the first time in years, the billionaire looked small, exposed, cornered by the woman he thought he had destroyed. The cameras captured it all, and the whispers, once soft, had become undeniable truths spreading like wildfire. By morning, the city had a new queen, stacks of tabloids spilled from newsstands, their headlines screaming in bold black ink. Scorned wife returns in Couture showdown. Clara Locke stuns gala, billionaire left speechless. Photos of Clara filled the front pages, her gown shimmering under the lights. Her gaze unflinching, Adrian caught beside her with his mask slipping. Vanessa appeared only in the margins, her storming exit reduced to a footnote. Adrian Locke's empire had always depended on image, on the belief that he was untouchable. But the cameras, once his allies, had turned traitor. Every outlet ran the same frame. Clara radiant, Adrian cornered. The story was no longer about his power. It was about her silence. But buried beneath the glossy photos, something more dangerous began to surface. Late editions carried not just images, but documents. Scans of receipts, bank transfers with Adrian's signature, photographs that tied him to properties hidden offshore. A ledger page that matched whispers of embezzlement investigators had long suspected, but never proven. The journalist Clara had called had moved quickly. The files she released were damning, a puzzle completed with ruthless precision. Fraud, tax evasion, betrayal, the kind of revelations that couldn't be laughed off or hidden behind a publicist's smile. Adrian sat in his office, headlines spread across his desk like weapons. His phone buzzed endlessly. Lawyers demanding answers, shareholders panicking, board members threatening resignations. His empire, once towering, trembled at its base. Vanessa was gone. She hadn't returned his calls, hadn't answered his messages. He told himself she was irrelevant, but the hollow echo of her absence clawed at him. She had been a shield, and now even she had abandoned him. Meanwhile, Clara said nothing. No interviews, no statements. She ignored the reporters crowding outside her apartment, their microphones thrust toward her door. Her silence only fed the frenzy. To the public, she was dignity embodied, a woman who let the truth speak louder than her voice ever could. Detective Elena Ramirez read the morning news at her desk. The files spread before her already matched against federal investigations. Clara hadn't just lit a spark, she'd delivered gasoline to an open flame. Elena knew the machinery of justice was grinding into motion, and Adrian Locke was directly in its path. By noon, television anchors were dissecting every detail, every file. If verified, one expert warned, these documents could mark the largest fraud scandal in recent corporate history. Adrian slammed the remote onto his desk, his reflection flickering back at him from the darkened screen. His jaw trembled. He had spent a lifetime building walls of charm and intimidation, but Clara had walked straight through them, armed with silence and proof, and the cameras, those he once commanded, were the very tools of his destruction. That night, Clara stood at her window, the city glowing beneath her. Flashes still popped outside as reporters waited for her to speak. But she closed the curtains gently and let the world speculate. She didn't need to chase justice. Justice was already chasing Adrian. The knock came at dawn. Adrian Locke opened his penthouse door to a wall of agents in dark suits, their badges flashing in the morning light. Behind them, news cameras were already rolling, tipped off by someone who wanted the world to see this moment. "Adrian Locke," the lead agent said, voice steady. "You're under arrest for fraud, tax evasion, and corporate misconduct. You have the right to remain silent." Adrian barely heard the rest. His knees threatened to give as handcuffs closed around his wrists. For years he had moved through life untouchable, dismissing laws as inconveniences. Now the cold bite of steel dug into his skin, proof that his empire had finally collapsed. Neighbors peeked from their doors. Paparazzi shouted his name, their cameras spitting bursts of light like gunfire. He tried to smile, to reclaim the charm that had always saved him. But the cameras weren't friendly anymore. They were vultures circling a corpse. By midday, every network carried the footage. Billionaire arrested in sweeping fraud scandal. His face, once gracing magazine covers, now filled screens as a symbol of corruption. And Vanessa? She had vanished. Her social media went dark, her name barely mentioned. To the public, she was a footnote, another ornament in Adrian's fall from grace. The woman who once laughed at Clara's simplicity was erased by silence, as though she had never mattered at all. Clara, meanwhile, became something else entirely. She hadn't asked for the attention, but it came anyway. Headlines shifted from Adrian's crimes to her quiet defiance. The wife who brought him down. Clara Locke, from humiliation to triumph. Tabloids praised her resilience. Talk shows dissected her strength. She was painted not as a vengeful widow of marriage, but as a survivor who had endured, observed, and finally struck with undeniable proof. But Clara ignored the noise. She didn't sit for interviews, didn't sell her story, didn't monetize her pain. The files had spoken. The law had answered. She had nothing more to prove. The night after Adrian's arrest, Clara prepared for another public step. The same gala doors that had once swallowed her humiliation opened again, only this time she wasn't walking in as a shadow. She stepped out of the car in the gown the designer had made for her, finished now, perfected, the midnight silk flowing like water over stone. Cameras roared her name. Lights flared, but Clara didn't flinch. She walked slowly, gracefully, her gown trailing behind her like armor forged from every wound she had survived. Guests turned, hushed, then applauded. Not for glamour, but for courage. She had stood where laughter once tried to break her and returned whole. She paused at the top of the steps, the flashbulbs painting her in light. For the first time in years she smiled, not sharp, not vengeful, but free. The kind of smile born not from victory over someone else, but from reclaiming herself. Adrian was gone, locked away to face the justice he thought he could buy. Vanessa was forgotten, her mockery echoing only as irony. And Clara walked forward, the cameras chasing her like worshippers. Yet her gaze wasn't on them. It was on the horizon ahead, where a life unbound by chains of manipulation finally waited. The gown whispered against the stone, each step a closing chapter. The woman once mocked was now untouchable, not because of silk or spectacle, but because she had survived. And in the silence between camera clicks, Clara Locke was free.